Hey, what's up everybody? Nick here, back with another lockdown fly tying video. And today I'm going to be tying up a really cool pattern that comes courtesy of Josh Phillips, owner of Spawn Fly Fish. This is an articulated shrimpy pattern designed to basically mimic a ghost shrimp that are prevalent in the South Puget Sound, and the fish eat them an awful lot. Now this fly is tied up with basically all Spawn fly fish materials. It's tied on these 60-degree shanks. Now this is basically just a standard shank, only at the front end where the eye would be, it's bent up at a 60 degree. They also sell them in a 90 degree, and it allows you to tie an articulated style fly as a jig, and so it gives it a lot of up and down action. I'm going to be using a slotted tungsten bead to really emphasize that up and down, and these things move really well in the water. You take any fly that I've tied on these, I've taken a lot of my standard patterns and then just tied them over as an articulated version on these jig shanks, and without fail, every one tied on the jig shank moves better than the original. So very, very cool option. If you guys haven't checked out Spawn Fly Fish, definitely go do so. They have a lot of really cool products for tying flies for Puget Sound. Now this is designed to basically imitate a ghost shrimp. Their ghost shrimp are all over Puget Sound, and one of the cool things about tying it on this shank like this is that you can fish it fairly deep with that heavy tungsten. You can get it right down to the bottom, but it rides hook point up the way we're going to tie it, so you're not going to be snagging bottom anywhere near as much. A lot of the areas that we fish in the South Puget Sound are lots of oyster beds and commercial shellfish operations where they take this mesh netting and they lay it over in the water on the bottom, over the top of their freshly seeded oysters and clams and things, I guess. And it's to prevent birds and seals and whatnot from getting in there and eating that stuff. But that stuff is fly snagging central. You put a fly into that net and it basically doesn't come out. So tying it this way is really cool because it allows you to really fish a fly right down near the bottom, drag it across the bottom, and not have any issues. These things catch a lot of sea run cutthroat, a lot of resident coho. When I first met Josh, and he was always telling me about this peach colored fly that he was always fishing. He fishes this color a lot down there, and I never really did. I did a little bit here and there. But since I became friends with him, I've been using this color a lot more, and it's hard to argue with it. It catches a lot of fish. So I'm just going to jump right into this. To get started, I'm using an Ahrex SA280 hook. It's size 4. These are a short shanked, wide gap hook. Really like these hooks. They're sticky sharp, really strong. That short shank with the wide gap I feel is really good for keeping that hook in a fish's mouth. They are extremely sharp. You gotta be careful. I can't tell you how many times I've drew blood jabbing myself with these things, especially tying these kind of small, shortish, articulated flies, so the hook's kind of flopping around back there. So be careful of that. So to get started, I'm using some Vivas 10-aught thread, and I'm just going to put down a thread base here. I'm definitely not the best at tying these flies. It's not a fly that I would say is one of my better ties, but the cool thing about this pattern is that you can tie it messy and it doesn't really matter. It fishes just as well. So it's right up my alley, since I'm not the world's prettiest fly tyer by any stretch of the imagination. So I'm going to get that thread back about to the bend of the hook, and then I'm going to take the first ingredient is a marabou feather. This is Spawn's Southern Florida Peach Marabou. Basically, they worked with Hairline to come up with this color specifically for ghost shrimp style patterns, and it's really cool stuff. Great color. Unlike, I have all kinds of different peach and orange and marabou, and this one's probably my favorite for this kind of thing. So I'm going to tie this in by the tip, and I'm just going to kind of separate the fibers somewhat to give myself a tie-in point. Tying with marabou is always a little bit messy, but just do the best you can. You're going to get marabou bits and pieces all over the place. You tie one of these things and you'll be picking marabou off your floor for weeks. That's just the way it is. But So just get that good and tied down, and then I'm going to start wrapping this up the hook shank. And this portion on this hook is basically going to make up the tail of this fly. And as I wrap this, I'm going to kind of stroke those fibers back between each wrap. And I'm kind of wrapping it fairly tight, almost on top of itself. You'll see as you go that some of these fibers will get kind of trapped, and it's really no big deal. They come out real easily. When you get done, you can just kind of work it out, and it's not that bad. Some sort of brown something in there. So I'm just going to kind of keep working this up the shank. One more wrap. And we'll do one more. No, we won't. That stem is getting really, really thick. It might just snap on me. So we'll tie this off. Don't stress getting pieces of marabou kind of trapped in there. It's really easy to fix. To get it tied down, you just carefully, avoiding that razor sharp hook, just pull those back, get that good and tied down. Next, I like to put a little bit of pearl crystal flash on mine. I don't believe Josh does this on his original, but I'm just a big fan of pearl crystal flash. So I'm going to take one strand, tie it in on the near side, take the excess, fold it over. So basically I'll have one piece of crystal flash on each side. I'll trim that off. Now this is going to be the tail. You can see that this is fairly long. It comes back probably close to 2 hook lengths. When I get done with this fly, I'm probably going to shorten this up a little bit. We'll see how it looks, but I'll show you how I do that. So next up, I'm going to be using some Spawn semi-sealed dubbing in their ghost shrimp color. This year Spawn Fly Fish came out with this Salish Sea collection of dubbing, and this is your standard semi-sealed dubbing like I'm sure everybody has used in the past. Only it comes in a whole bunch of colors that they worked with the designer basically specifically for Puget Sound. They're really cool colors like herring back, they've got chum fry, polychaete, and they've got several shrimpy colors. This one is the ghost shrimp. It's kind of an orangish, peachish color. Really like this color. So I'm gonna put this in with a dubbing loop, and I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see this with my macro lens. It might not catch all of it, but I'm basically going to pull off about 3 to 4 inches of thread. Well, actually it's more like 6 to 8 inches of thread because I'm going to double it. I'm going to pull it off. I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to wrap that thread around my finger and come right back up on top, and then I'm going to take and wrap 3 wraps over the top of both pieces of thread where they come off the hook shank. And then I'm going to come behind and over the top one time to really lock it down, and then you end up with a loop here, and that's where I'm going to be putting in my dubbing. So I'm going to take some of this ghost shrimp dubbing, kind of play with it and rework it a bit so most of the fibers are kind of going in the same direction. I'm only going to be dubbing this little portion of the hook, so I don't need a ton, but I'm also not going super sparse with this either. Using fairly generous amount for this little bit that I'm going to be dubbing. So I'll get it in my loop, attach my dubbing spinner here, straighten that just a hair so it's kind of in the middle, and then hopefully without trapping too much marabou in my crystal flash, I'm going to just spin this up. I'm definitely not the best with dubbing loops. I used to do it a lot. This is basically the same concept of tying like a semi-seal leech. I used to fish lakes a ton way back in the day, and I used to tie these all the time. But these days I don't do all that much of it. So I've got that spun up. I'm just going to take my brush and just brush it out a little bit. Most of this is going to get covered up for the most part, so it doesn't need to be super pretty. But I'm just going to brush it and kind of get some of those fibers out. And then I'm going to start wrapping this up the shank. Right up to the eye. And again, this does not have to be pretty. If you get crowd your eye and you got a bunch of fibers kind of going every way, it really doesn't matter. This is going to get attached to the shank anyway and covered up by other material. So don't sweat that at all. So I'll tie that off, trim off the last little bit of that loop, and then take these fibers and pull them back and just get this tied down good and cleaned up a hair just because I'm picky like that. And then we're going to go ahead and whip finish. It's going to be it for the tail section of this fly. And I'm going to take and brush it out just a little bit more. Again, doesn't need to be special because it's going to get covered up. Okay, so now we're going to attach this to our shank. I've got my shank ready here. I'm using a mottled orange bead from Hairline, slotted tungsten bead. This is the 20 millimeter shank, and I'm using the 4.6 millimeter bead. I believe on Spawn Fly Fish's website, they have a blog, and there's a bunch of step-by-steps for various flies that Josh ties, and he has one on there for this, and I believe he uses the 5.5 millimeter tungsten bead, which looks just fine on this. I use the little smaller one just to make it easier for casting for people. As a guide, I have people of various skill levels and casting abilities, so I don't want a fly that's too tough for people to fish. And while that hook is still in the vise, I'm going to flip it over and attach this shank. You can see I already have the bead on there. When you put a slotted bead on there, you make so that the slot is towards the back, it's towards the hook. So there's a little normal size hole at the front. You slide that end on first, and then if I want this to ride hook point up, like it's sitting right here, so I make sure that the bend in this shank is pointing up, where it points up is the same side as the hook point. So I'm just going to throw that on there, just like that, super easy. Now I'm going to take that hook out and put the shank in my vise. This is where I start to jab myself a lot, because with this it's only a 20 millimeter shank, so that hook is right there. So just want to be careful of that. Now I'm going to take some lead. This is what is this? This is 0.015, and I'm just going to do 6, 7, 8 wraps right in here behind the bead. And you're not using this really for weight. With that tungsten bead on there, it's going to have plenty of weight. But what this does, oops, I wanted to come out of there, is you can push that lead right up into the slotted part of that bead, and it'll help keep it in place. Works out pretty well. So now I'm going to take my thread, I'm going to attach it to the shank right in between the lead and where the open part of the shank is still open there. And then I'm going to get the the shank all nice and secured and closed up by just wrapping it real good with a bunch of thread wraps. It's gonna lock that down and make sure that it doesn't pop open at some point. And I'm gonna do some wraps up right in front of that lead to kind of build a bit of a dam in front of the lead so the lead won't slide back and allow that bead to start sliding all over the place and rotating on me. Get that lead kind of covered up with thread wraps. Okay. Alright, next steps, I'm going to form another dubbing loop. Same thing as before. I'm going to pull off some, I want it about that long, about 4.5, 5 inches. Do 3 wraps over it, one back behind and over the top, and just move my thread up forward so it's sort of out of my way. Take some more of this ghost shrimp dubbing, same thing as before. I'm just going to kind of pull the fibers and work them so that they're pretty much uniform, all kind of going the same way, and using another pretty healthy little chunk here. Nope, don't do that. Drop your loop and let it go spinning all over the place. Open up my loop, put that dubbing in it. Take the dubbing spinner tool and just like before, spin that baby up. Here we go. Take and just give it a quick little brush. Just like the other dubbing, this is going to get more or less covered up, at least the bulk of it, so you don't gotta stress it if it doesn't look beautiful. Then I'm going to start wrapping this up, that shank. Thread out of the way. And when I do it like this, I don't mind kind of going back over the top of itself a little bit. Just creates a little bit more bulk. Nothing. Ow! As I mentioned, watch out for those hooks. So I'm going to wrap it up to, probably about a bead's worth behind the bead. I'm going to leave that open. So I'm going to tie in another marabou feather here. Tie that off and trim it, and then carefully pull those fibers back, tie it down real good and kind of clean it up a little bit. And that one hurt. Another quick brush. This fly looks pretty unruly in the vise, but I'll get it wet at the end and you can see how it really lays back and just looks fantastic. Okay, so now I'm going to take another one of these Southern Peach marabou feathers. Do the same thing as before. I'm just separating a tie-in spot at the tip. Get that tied down. Trim off that extra. Let pieces of marabou go everywhere because, by God, that's what marabou does. And I'm going to do just like I did before, just kind of pulling these fibers back kind of together to help me wrap it a little easier. In fact, if you get your fingers wet, it'll kind of help make it a little easier to deal with. And then I'm going to make nice tight wraps right up close to that bead. If I was smart, I would have grabbed my hackle pliers. That would probably help with this. I'm going to wrap this pretty tight right up against that bead and then tie it off. And again, when you tie it off, it's pretty well impossible to avoid trapping down various pieces of this feather. Do not stress it. Boy, that hook almost got me again. Trim the rest of that stem off, and then I can kind of just use my fingers and pluck that and sort of make sure that it's all out and not trapped. And then I'll very carefully again pull those fibers back. Get that tied down good. Little piece of stem right there. I'm going to try to trim. It's pretty short though. Now you could certainly just tie that off and be done with it right now, but I'm going to take some more of this dubbing and just dub some straight onto my thread and cover those thread wraps. Put a little ball of dubbing right up behind the bead. I like to wax my thread when I'm working with this semi-seal. Makes it just a touch easier to dub on there. Especially since I don't do that much of this actual dubbing onto the thread in my normal day-to-day fly tying, so of course I'm catching all kinds of marabou in there because marabou is just a pain. And I think I'll just do a little bit more dubbing. One more little patch here. I'm trying to cover all these thread wraps, and I like the look of when it's a nice little bump there, bump of dubbing. I don't want it to be super thin. I like it. That's just my personal preference. There we go. Pull any loose fibers back, and then I'm going to whip finish. Okay, and that is it for the tying. Not an overly difficult fly to tie. The dubbing loop is, a technique that we should all know anyway. Like I said, I don't know how well that's going to actually show up with my camera when I go back and watch this video. But if you're interested in learning dubbing loop techniques, there's a lot of good videos out there. The last thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take this out, and I'm just going to kind of pull that marabou back with the front marabou, see where it ends, and I'm going to shorten this tail, I think, just a little bit, I'm not going to use scissors. I don't like to cut marabou because I don't like even marabou tips. I'm just going to basically take this feather, kind of pull it all back, and then I'm just going to pluck it with my thumb and fingers here. And that's going to allow it to be still nice and uneven and not just flush like you use a pair of scissors and just plucked it. I'm going to cut that flash though about even with where I'm plucking my tail. And let's see. That looks pretty good. So I shorten it up. It's about maybe just over a hook length. Not too bad. Again, you can see it looks pretty goofy and unruly. I've got a bowl of water here. I'm just gonna throw this in some water so you can get an idea of what this looks like wet, because when it gets wet it really comes alive, and you'll be really amazed when you see these things wet and moving in the water. With these jig shanks, man, these things just move so nice, and that marabou is so, it pulses, and it's just such a good movement to begin with. There we go. I'm not going to really be able to put that back into my vise, I don't think. Maybe I will. Yeah, that worked out. So there you go. Just a shrimpy articulated pattern tied on a 60-degree jig shank that catches a lot of fish in Puget Sound. Go check out spawnflyfish.com. Pick up some of these shanks and go nuts with them. They're a lot of fun to tie with, and you can come up with some really cool ideas. With the virus and the shutdown and everything, a lot of people are out of work, a lot of businesses are shut down. So I feel it's important that we do what we can to support our small local businesses. And Spawn's one of my personal favorites, so go check them out. Definitely recommend it. So give it a shot, add a few to your box. If they work for you, let me know. I'm sure the boys over at Spawn Fly Fish would love to hear about it as well. Hope everyone is staying safe and healthy out there, and as always, thanks for watching.